Hello, this is Mary Middlestat with Design and Be Merry, and I'm here to finish and put out the second half of my video about how to finish inside corners and outside points when you're appliquing and doing wool. The first one was, if I will refresh you, was when you were sewing a shape to a background piece of fabric, and you can check out that video. This video deals with how you deal with the very outside edge when you have put a backing on and it's your final edge that you want finished. And what I usually typically do, I quite often use a fusible adhesive, and it's put on the back of the top piece. I do all my stitching on that. It helps keep the shape. And then I fuse that to a larger piece of the fabric, whatever I'm using for the backing. In this case, it is another piece of red wool. And then you can cut around and you'll get a nice even edges, which will help make your piece much more easy to stitch around if the two edges are even. This is a fairly thick wool. This is Melton wool out of Pendleton. And I've also chosen, you can choose a thick thread, you can choose a thinner one. I try and have the seam cover up the inside edges of where the wool meets. You may be using a thinner wool, that may not be a big deal, but you can use a size 8, size 12, you could use a few, anywhere from 2 to 4 strands of a regular embroidery floss. That's up to you. You can experiment and see what you like about it. I'm going to show you 2 tips. The inside curves turns are very much similar to sewing it right directly onto another fabric. Usually it's, if you notice, it's a nice little 3 stitch where you come out the same place right here before you go up and down your aisle, or your aisle, up the side. There are many ways to finish the tips, I imagine, and you may find all kinds of other possibilities. This is simply a single thread, 1 stitch that's much like a blanket stitch, and it just sits right on the edge. You kind of can coax it into place. The second one is one I developed for myself, which is actually you take the stitch twice and you end up with a double edge, and it makes a little bit more of a visual point, but it also can capture some of those stray threads on the edge, and it's just an option for you to try. You will have to, as with all things, you try it and see what it works. Anyways, I will show you both tips. The first one, I usually start, if I'm given a shape like this, I'll start at an inside point, and I will usually hide my thread, which you can see me doing. Don't pull your needle out of the wool. See my video on how to hide your ends of wool. If you have not taken that in, that gives you some options. And you can usually pull the wool out there, and you can see that it's coming out from between the two. And I simply will take a stitch, a blanket stitch, right in the crook of that V, and pull it up tight. And then I'm set to go, and I can start up the side and pull it. Make sure you pull your thread straight out to the side. So often people say their stitches roll to the top or do something like that. You want to pull them direct to the side, because that'll help you get that seam where you're going. The other thing, again, that I'll emphasize here, and I'll be having another video on how do you get nice even stitches. I often get comments on how do you get your stitches on the back to be as even as the ones on the front. That is because I use and hold my piece at a perpendicular angle, and I punch my needle down. I'm not holding it in a traditional sense, and that helps a lot. The other thing that I do, the other trick that I do, is I will work on top of, I have a book here, but I have a lap desk that I work on, and I'll work off the edge, and I find it very convenient because I can go straight down. It's less tiresome on my hands. And so I rest my hand and I can hold the piece on the book, and I just work right off the edge, and by pulling this straight out to the side, this thread here, and going straight down, I get nice even stitches on both sides of the wool, the front and the back. And let me go up here a couple more. and you will see that you get nice even stitches. If you got big cushy wool, you're always going to have the stitches will kind of sink into the wool, and you can adjust how tight you want to pull them when you go down like that. Anyways, as we work our way up to the edge, we're going to do the same thing that we did in the first video, which, whoops, nothing like a knot here to get this going. Okay, you will start to reduce the size of your stitch, the width, this from here to here. You will start to reduce it a little bit because obviously you're heading towards a narrow peak of fabric and you won't be able to get a wide stitch in up there. You want a peak. You can kind of estimate. I'll probably put the peak stitch there so I can get one more stitch here, and I'll make it slightly narrower in width. And if by any chance you find your points have a few stray pieces of wool, you can trim those beforehand to keep it nice and as crisp as possible. And again, the fusible will help with that. Okay, now I'm going to go down. Hopefully you can see this. I'm going to go right down into the middle of that V. And you shouldn't really be more than maybe 1/4 of an inch from the tip. In other words, this distance from here to here probably shouldn't be too much more. Now I'm going to go down in the same hole, only this time I'm going to pull the stitch towards the peak. And tighten the side. People are somewhat afraid to play with their stitches, but you can do a lot of adjusting. I usually put my needle in the tip and it helps me locate where I want that to sit. And it's kind of like making it behave. So I'm going to hold that. I'm not going to pull it real tight. You don't have to pull it really tight. And I'm going to make another stitch in that same hole, only pulling it out to the side. And by doing that, you'll see that you get a pretty consistent stitch that sits right at the peak. Let's check the back, because sometimes on the back you get a little bit more of a cattywampus depending upon how thick, and you can also adjust that. Put that needle in there and you can adjust that as well. So now I have my piece and I can begin to stitch up the other side, and I go back to the same width stitch I was using when I went up the side. And last but not least, if you get, this one has been handled, I've been putzing with it, so if you get any little fringes, very carefully take your scissors, but I emphasize the word carefully because quite frankly nobody wants to clip their stitching and have that occur. So I don't know if you saw that, if that was on screen or not, but I trimmed this very little bit of fuzz. You just have to be careful you don't do it. I do that particularly with these heavy Meltons because they're very thick and they're not fraying. It's just the softness of the fabric gets out. But anyways, so you can continue on down your way, and that is the first stitch where you just, the first tip point, where you actually just take in a single stitch. Okay, I did a few stitches, and as you approach the inside corner, you kind of have to pay attention and space your stitches, how many you think you can get. You can kind of just take your needle and rough. You're going to be wanting to have a stitch that will be right along that line, somewhere right in there, if you lay your needle along this extra corner. So I'm thinking I can probably get one more here before I go into that corner. And like I said, these corners are very similar to the corners that were on the other one. Now what I'm going to do is lay your needle alongside, go in and take your stitch right along that line and locate it in the corner. And so this is sitting pretty much right in the corner. Turn your piece if you can, and you're going to go down straight from that corner, and you can make a long stitch, you can make a decorative stitch if you want. I usually make mine just a little longer because it just, to me, my notion, it makes it a little prettier, but do whatever works for you. Pull it up and you'll notice that it sits almost at the same point that this stitch is almost at the same point. Now to start to go up the other side, you simply do the same thing as in the other one. You lay your needle along the side to locate where to go down, and you go into that stitch, and obviously you pull it up against once more in that corner. So you got 3 stitches that are kind of located all at this single point, and you can continue to go up the edge once you do this, and you'll have a nice dot. The other thing you can also do with this is, just a suggestion, is you can have some fun by making decorative stitches in here. You can make 5 stitches. Usually it's an odd count, but you can certainly make your stitches, and they can go down. And again, if you're taking your needle real perpendicular, you'll notice that you'll get nice even stitches all along the edge, and you'll also get this seam to follow along in between the seam of your wool. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do the 2-thread or 2-stitch tip, and again, you can certainly choose what works for you, and it may take a little bit of time to get these. You do the same as you do with the other one. You kind of space your sit, and about 1/4 inch or so you can come in here and take a stitch right in between the 2 sides of that mountain, and locate your thread. Okay, it's being stubborn this morning. Okay, so like I said, this place of entry is between those 2. Now I'm going to go down just like I did with the single thread, and I'm going to come up over here holding the thread. It really helps if you can kind of coordinate your hands, and it'll feel awkward at first, but after a while you'll get used to using your 2 hands in concert with each other. It's more than just holding the fabric with one hand. This allows you to hold. If you notice that I can hold that stitch there. So now what I'm doing with that stitch pulled to the top and this thread going around the back, I am going to go into that same hole again and repeat that stitch, coming out again, and you notice that this thread is behind the needle, just like a regular blanket stitch that you've been doing. And by holding this in place, I'm going to very slowly pull this up, and I will have two threads right there, and I can put my needle in there to kind of make sure it's at the point, and I can do that on the back as well. And I catch these threads. Now, what I found is, at one time I was just doing this and continuing, but what I found was helpful is to go into the back, on the back side, and catch these 2 stitches. I don't know if you can, you just pass your needle between these 2 back, the back side of the stitches, and it kind of tugs that into where it will stay in place better. And then when I'm here, I go up again. I turn it over and I catch the upper part, and by doing that it keeps that stitch in place and makes it very nice. So now I'm going to go back down along the other side and make the first blanket stitch on that side, and again pull out straight to the side so your stitch won't crawl up. Okay, I've held that side, and you can see how that stitch is nice, and then you can start from there. You can start going around. Obviously, I do this very quickly, obviously, to do it and make sure that it's on camera is a different thing, and you will probably have to exercise a few practice times to get it. A little bit of patience and using your needle will make a big difference. This is the back side. And even when you're done, you can kind of go in here and just tug and make sure that sits just right. It covers, these 2 stitches tend to cover the wool a little bit better, and that may work well for your heavier wools. Probably your lighter wools, you may or may not need it. And it has a little bit of a different look to it because of the 2 threads, and depending upon your thread, that may be more or less visible. If you're using heavy thread, you're going to have quite a heavy tip. I use, this is the size 12 Valdani, and I use that for almost all my stitching, and I find it's pretty well accurate even on this very heavy Melton wool, which you can see how wide. This is almost a well, it's more than 2/16. It's not quite a quarter of an inch. But it's going to make a nice, this is going to be a little ornament for somebody this Christmas. I found this in my trinket box. I don't remember where I got it from, and used some silver thread. Anyways, this is basically a way for you to cover outside points. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. Some suggestions that you can try out and increase your repertoire of stitching. And if you're interested in more of my things, I do have a website, www.designandbemerry.com. I'm a designer. I sell patterns. I'm a small operation, but I also have tutorials, and obviously I have other videos about stitching. Please take a look at them, and if you enjoy them, like and follow them, and feel free to communicate with me if you have any questions. I hope you're all home safe and stitching during these crazy times of this virus. Enjoy your stitching, and have a great day today. Thank you.